Hi there and welcome. This is the introduction video to our module this week, which is Globalization and Film. You'll see that we're looking at many of the same topics, really, the same themes come up here again. And I think you see that in every module, some of the same themes. The way we're sort of approaching those themes this time is through film. And so you'll notice that the two articles that we're reading today have to do with film. The first one is about China's decision, the Chinese government decision in the 1990s to start importing Hollywood films from the United States. And so this gives you an account of what the issues at stake were there. And it does it in the context, again, of those themes that we've already been discussing, things like homogenization, heterogenization. And the author, Wendy Sue, I think it is her name, she breaks it down quite nicely at the beginning between sort of three options for in this heterogenization, homogenization debate, and it's probably, of course, the three that we've encountered, right? One is, Americanization. One is, like a sort of cultural variety, right? And then the third is some sort of a mix between them. Within that, when it comes specifically to film, right, which is what we're dealing with this week, she also gives us another three sort of arguments about particularly in her article, the success of Hollywood films outside of the United States, right, beyond the United States and beyond the West as well, right? So when we're looking at China, and again, she gives us sort of three concepts of that, three different conceptions of that given by different academics. One is sort of the cultural imperialism argument, right? That the United States, the dominance of Hollywood in world cinema, is an example of American hegemonic culture spreading and sort of spreading itself across the face of the earth and sort of annihilating other cultures. So that's one option. The other option is more of a liberal option, she says. One where the success of Hollywood and of American films abroad, beyond the United States and beyond the West, is not sort of a sign of American aggression, sort of soft power aggression across the world, or the United States seeking a hegemonic hold on culture across the world. It's not that. What it is, though, is it's a reflection of inevitable forces of modernization. Right? The modern world makes that. Those are the most modern movies, and modern people want to watch those modern movies. Right? So that's why it's not any kind of nefarious plan by Hollywood or by the Americans generally. It's just the fact that America is the most advanced nation, and particularly in the most advanced in this way of thinking in making films. Right? They have the big budgets, and they have the best skills, and they have the best special effects and that sort of thing. And they have the most experience as well. Also think about it, and this comes up in the article as well, is that, well, and it goes down a little bit of a different path, but it goes something like this. Like, so if America is the place where you have the most money to make films, right, the most capital sort of devoted to filmmaking, if you do have the best skilled workers in the film industry, right, whether that be directors, or writers, and actors, all of that, and the best technologies and that sort of thing, the best studios and those sorts of things. Well, that attracts people from all over the world, and so it might be in America. Right, but where are the actors and the actresses from, for example? Right, where do they originate from? Are they all Americans? right? They're in American movies, they're in Hollywood movies. Maybe they're now they live in Hollywood, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example, and maybe this is just a my generation thing, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the biggest movie stars of all time, but he's not American. I mean, I suppose he is American these days in the same way that I'm also American these days, but not originally, right? And maybe that goes for a lot of actors and actresses, right? And so then you say, well, to what extent are they really American movies anyway, right? They're being made in America. So that's one second argument there. The third one is, well, maybe I just gave you the third one. About are they American anyway? Are these movies American anyway? So so you'll have an account of also the other thing that I like about this, and this is sort of mirrored as well in the second article. But the other thing I like about this reading is, there's a question like, okay, was the importation of American movies into China good for China? Right? Did it benefit China or did it harm China? Even did it benefit the film industry in China or did it harm the film industry in China? And you could try and answer that question, but this article doesn't really answer that question. Right? What it does is it breaks it down and says, look, for these groups of people, they supported it and benefited from it. These other groups of people over here didn't benefit from it, right? Or at least didn't feel like they were about to benefit from it when it was happening. So it shows, and again, this is going to come up more, I think, in the second article, but it shows that rarely does globalization have the same impact on all of the groups within one society, right? So I think that's good. And to see it even within the movie industry in China, one of the things it says is that, look, the movie industry in China was failing. It was something like, was it like average audiences were dropping something like 5 million, by 5 million people per year. Now, China's a very big market, but 5 million people a year, it was hemorrhaging before they started importing Hollywood movies, right? So the Chinese movies they weren't drawing audiences. They were running out of money, there was no capital, they were failing. And so, the injection of money that brought it to the distributors, the film distribution companies and the the cinemas and that sort of thing. I mean that they received a huge influx of money, right? And the film industry itself started to grow. The market for movies grew, right? So that's there was some benefit there, right? And then of course, there is the criticism, right, from intellectuals, from Chinese studios who are making movies, that says, look, these movies don't reflect our values. Right? We could do other readings, right, that talk about do films influence people or not, but that's not what really this article is not really about that. But it's much more about what was the impact on the Chinese filmmaking industry, on the film going public, what was the impact, and what were some of the criticisms and the fears about importing Hollywood films into China, 10 per year. So that's the first reading. The second reading is about Bollywood. And what I like about the second reading, along with and it's really that probably, right, that it again presents India not as one homogenous whole that's affected in the same way by globalization. The interesting thing here, so in the first article, we've got some globalization in the sense of a foreign import, right? We've got Hollywood movies being imported into China where they weren't before. So that's sort of the, what impact did globalization of the film industry, right, have in China? So that's good. Here, we're looking at India, and we're looking at the Indian film making businesses. But we're asking, like, how are they affected by globalization? Here, we don't have imports. We're not talking in this article about imports, like Hollywood imports or any other movie import, but we're talking about exports, right? So now what we're talking about is when the Indian film industry starts to see that its market is bigger abroad than it is at home. Now what, right? Largely featured in this article are Indian people, either emigres, people who've emigrated away from India and now live in Canada or the United States or elsewhere in the world, in Britain, or their families, right? The second generation, third generation Indians that live all over the world, and certainly in the West. And how do they, who are a large source of income, right, for Indian movies, with the advent of satellite television, the internet, and Bollywood. It talks about this in the article, right? Bollywood, we don't have to think of it only as movies being made in Mumbai, but you know, as sort of as music content, right? Digital content that is on the internet. So it talks about the change from sort of pre-globalization, if you like, a pre-globalized Indian film industry that's catering for a domestic audience and perhaps even a sort of a more rural audience, perhaps a poorer audience, right? And what happens when globalization happens and now we have access to a much wider market, a worldwide market that includes quite wealthy, successful, you know, successful in the terms of sort of professional achievement, expatriate Indians living all over the world. You know, what does that do to the Indian movie industry? And so that's what that's really about. And it's nice because it's interviews with people in Punjab, often in villages in Punjab. People, I think it tells you this at the sort of towards the beginning of the article, but people who are on fairly modest incomes, you know, up to a sort of a maximum of like $600 a month equivalent. So, but people who feel like they maybe have been a little bit left behind by the Indian movie industry, that maybe the films that they're watching now are not really written for them, right? With them in mind that they have no one on those films to identify with. And so that's it, right? One of the interesting things about that, about the impact of globalization on the Indian film industry is, as it's explained in this paper, is like, you know, could you really call it westernization? Like, what's going on? And this really gets us back to Apajurai, of course, right? Where, but it's how much of it is really to do with the West, right? If it's that we're trying to cater to Hindi-speaking audience or perhaps a Punjabi-speaking audience outside of India that is living in the West. And really, again, the interesting thing is the nuances that there's different groups within India, and there's different groups of people around the world that are watching Indian movies, Hindi movies, for example. And the fact that they're living elsewhere, the fact that they're not living in India, even though they might be Indians, what impact is that having on the movie industry? Is it like, to call that Americanization seems a little bit, would seem a little bit far-fetched, right? A little bit contrived. And of course that's part of the point, right? And if we go back to the first reading where we talk about those three different sort of approaches to film, and sort of understanding of globalization of film and what globalization means for film. You know, probably that first Americanization, westernization one becomes a bit of a difficult argument in the case of Bollywood and the changes that have happened there as a result of greater markets brought by globalization. Right, and think about it, if we think about it in terms of Apajurai, we've got the sort of the technoscapes, right, which, you know, satellite television, the internet, right, streaming, like streaming television now, television on demand, where part of which is that wherever we are in the world, we can watch we can watch films, or we can watch television shows, or we can listen to music from anywhere else in the world. This week I was listening to some, well, this is a case in point, probably actually more as I say. This week I've been listening to a lot to Sotiri. I was going to say it's a Greek group, but it's not really. Well, it is. It's a Greek American, right? He's growing up in New York. His parents are both from Greece, and a few years ago, do you remember that song Despacito? Is that what it's called? I don't even know the original song. I don't know if I've ever heard it, but he came out with a parody version, right? Which goes Thes Pasticcio, which is I want pasticcio, which, if you know, it's a sort of a famous and sort of traditional dish in Greece, kind of like lasagna, but they use a particular kind of pasta instead of the flat pasta. They use but it's called pasticcio, right? And it's like long tubes. Anyway, so it's kind of funny, right? And I sort of friend showed me it a few years ago, but I remembered it this week for some reason. I started watching it, and then I started to see some of the other things that he'd done, this sotiri. And it's kind of a pun, sotiri, because tiri means cheese. So it's like kind of so cheesy is kind of the idea, but then sotiri is also like a Greek first name, right? Anyway. So I was watching some of the other things he did, and they all sort of revolve, all these songs that he's done revolve around Greek food, and he's quite popular, like on YouTube. He's got millions and millions of views, like 4 or 5 million views or something like that. And I watched one of the interviews that he did with Greek TV and that sort of thing. And so, anyway, you know, the fact that that can exist, right? Even the name itself, the sotiri, is sort of it only works if you know Greek and English, right? So it's sort of a hybridization. Right? He himself, right, having grown up in New York, the video that he makes, I should put like a link to it or something on there. But the video that he makes, he flies over to Greece to make the video for Thes Pasticcio. The fact that he's a Greek growing up in New York, right? And then the fact that he's on now Greek news, talking about his songs about Greek food from sort of a little bit of a, when you watch the interview, it's a little bit, it's interesting because he's not, he has there's an American element to him, where there's this American pop star to some degree. I mean, he's not a huge pop star, but there's an element of of hybridity, right? Of American and Greek, and he's there talking to Greek news, but he's from New York, right? But he's speaking, his Greek's good enough, right? Anyway, but the fact that we can watch that sort of a thing as well, the fact that he can make it, the fact that we can watch it, it starts to really complicate these questions about, about Americanization and Westernization as sort of a synonym of globalization. It's very interesting. I watch BritBox, which is a TV service that streams British television here on my smart TV, right? And it's that technology that we're talking about in that second article. It's that technology, the ability of somebody, an expatriate like me. I've moved away from Britain. I haven't lived there now for 13, 14 years, coming up to 14, but I can still watch the TV that I grew up with, right? And my kids now, right? My kids are watching the TV from England as well. And, they've grown up here. My son was 3 months old when we came here, and my daughter was born here. So my daughter in particular doesn't, but both of them, right, have sort of, other than through me, have and sort of familial ties, have limited experience with British culture, like from living in Britain, but they can still have that experience here living in Arizona. So, and now you see actually on BritBox, some of the shows that they're coming out with, they are aimed at an American audience. So you see more American actors now doing British television. I'm trying to remember that guy's name. I know him from Parks and Recreation. He was what was it, the city manager, that fella there. He was doing a show on BritBox where he's a police chief. He's an American. He's been fired from his job in Miami as like the chief of police in Miami, and so he goes over to some like rural part of England. Like it's probably been done before, that sort of thing, right? That the city cop going to the rural place to be a policeman and finding differences and things. But you have the added thing, right, of sort of an American going to, it's Rob something, isn't it, the actor's name? Anyway, of an American going to Britain as well. So you have the it's kind of a comedy, but it's kind of a drama as well, right? So there's, you know, they take it seriously, but there's funny elements to it, right? Because here's this American policeman with American policing ways, sort of trying to police a rural part of Lincolnshire or something like that, right? And the sort of the clashes of culture and the policemen in Lincolnshire not used to the sort of policing that this fellow. So Rob Lowe, is that his name? Rob Lowe, I think it's come to me eventually. Anyway, I think that's his name. I'm gonna look it up really quick. But anyway, so it's that, but it's about Indian cinema instead, and so you're seeing that. But many of those same sorts of themes. Again, it's Rob Lowe. It's hybridity. You know, and that suits perhaps some people more than others in India, or and maybe in Britain as well. Maybe those shows with Rob Lowe, maybe they suit some elements of the British public more than others, perhaps. All right, and no doubt there's something because of course BritBox, it's available here in America, and so some of the audience, no doubt, I mean maybe much of the audience, right? So maybe it's not just British expats that are watching BritBox, but maybe there's a lot of Americans that sort of enjoy British TV shows, right? And so maybe the need to appeal to those folks, who after all are going to be paying the subscription fee as much as I am, and again perhaps more because perhaps there's more of them, and so maybe the shows become more and more directed towards those people, and that's, like I said, that's exactly what you've got really with this Indian example here of films in particular, and how they're changing to appeal to a more global audience, perhaps a global audience of Indian expatriates and their families, but nevertheless a global audience that's a different one from a rural Punjabi audience. So anyway, I'll leave it there. I enjoyed talking about this, and this is really interesting stuff. And one of the good things about it is the themes sort of remain the same. So we're encountering the same themes. Hopefully, at the end of this course, you'll be very familiar with the themes of, you know, a hybridization of heterogeneity versus homogeneity, and about the effects that globalization has, and about the unequal effects of globalization, right? Even within countries. So we're not saying just, oh, well, it has again, one kind of effect on China, and one kind of effect on India, and one kind of effect on the United States, or on France, or in South Africa. No, because let's have a look at the different groups within those countries and see what different effects it has. And I think that brings it, and I do this in another course. I do a course called Global Trends, SGS 303, where we really look at the backlash against globalization. One of the big themes in that one is the sort of winners and losers versus globalization. So winners and losers from globalization. And I think we have that, right? If we want to look at that, we can look at that in the Chinese case, that there's groups that won from the importation of Hollywood movies, and there's groups that did not. And you know, and perhaps those that are winning in China from globalization, and those who are winning in India from globalization, and those who are winning in the United States, maybe they have more and more in common than with the people in their own countries who are losing from globalization, right? And that sort of takes us to that old argument, right, from the beginning of the 20th century, right, about class. right that working class has more in common. Like a British working class, you know, has more in common with the German working class than they do with the British upper class, and so they're not going to have a war. Yeah, and of course that's that's exactly what they did do. So so we have to be careful not to go too far along that road, or be too confident that we know how things are going to turn out, or who's going to identify with whom, because national identity and identification does seem to oftentimes override these other things like winners and losers in globalization. All right, that's the end of me for sure this time.